Yeah, so I'm going to start with this logo. Some of the younger folks in the audience may not know what this is. This is Google Plus. Google Plus was a attempt by Google, arguably one of the most successful companies in the history of the world in terms of just like building something and taking it to like a galactic almost scale quickly. Their attempt at building a social network. It was super hot for like 2 weeks because they had it closed. You had to kind of get an invite to it. So the tech community was all, trying to get invites. And if you had an invite, you could share it with other people, and it was really cool. But it obviously isn't around, right? We don't talk about like, oh, just hit me up on Google Plus, right? Not a thing that really exists today for any reason. And I think it's really interesting to think about these cases because, lots of stuff fails, right? Products fail all the time. But why do things fail, right? Why did Google Plus fail? And there's a lot of answers to that question. I'm not going to claim to know all of them, but I think today's talk will kind of give you some interesting paradigms by which to ask this question. One of the things that I think is clearly not true is Google Plus didn't fail because Google's incompetent, right? So Google Plus launched in like October 2011. This was arguably, Google was crushing it, right? Here's their kind of quarterly revenues over the kind of period. Like they're growing a lot, right? They're growing, this is in, millions of dollars. So they're a couple billion in growth quarter over quarter there. So clearly the company was going up and to the right, just like you'd want a tech stock to do. And this is after 10 years of going up and to the right. So arguably, they've managed to, in 10 years, kind of go from being a company, Google, no one knew what that was, to being a company that literally every person on the planet was using every single day. So probably not incompetent about building things. They know about that. Is it possible that you can't beat Facebook? Maybe Facebook and it's just such a good social media app that it can't possibly be beaten. Well, at about the same time as Google Plus came out, Instagram came out, Snapchat came out. A few years later, TikTok came out. And I'm not going to say these are bigger than Facebook. Obviously, Instagram got acquired by Facebook pretty quickly for a pretty nice chunk of change, but obviously have been successful, especially with some demographics, at kind of launching a successful social media app or company. You can beat Facebook. It can be done. You can build another viable social media company that'll attract millions of users that will use it every single day. So it's possible. So it's just interesting to kind of ask the question, why did Google Plus fail? What didn't Google do well? And we're going to kind of come back to this at the end of the talk, but I think this quote really encapsulates a lot of the reasons why I think this happens, and by the end of this talk, you'll understand this quote. People don't want to buy a quarter-inch drill. They want a quarter-inch hole. I don't even know who Theodore Levitt is, but I love this quote because it really encapsulates this idea that oftentimes when we're building technology, especially as technologists, if you are a technologist, you kind of have this mindset that people want to buy what you're selling, when oftentimes they don't actually care what you're selling. They care about the outcome of what you're selling gives to them. And we're going to talk about this whole talk here. So who am I? I'm Sean. I really like building things that are simple to address complex challenges. I've been doing this for about 10 years now. I started out my career in the Marine Corps, where you don't think about building things a lot, but we're constantly building systems and tools and techniques to help the U.S. military and the places where we're at succeed with really complex missions like, rebuilding Afghanistan. I've done that.
Hey, Sean, sorry to interrupt.
I worked in Haiti. Yes.
Sometimes your audio's kind of peaking.
Okay.
You can check that out.
I'll talk a little bit quieter. Thanks for the heads up. I appreciate that. It would be very annoying to listen to me and have me be buzzy. So started out my career in the Marine Corps building processes and procedures to help commanders better understand this thing called the human terrain. Whenever the military is somewhere, there's civilians around. Oftentimes the civilians are kind of the whole reason we're there. I spent, most of my deployments were actually related to humanitarian assistance. I was in Haiti after the earthquake in 2010. I was in the Philippines after typhoons. I was in Afghanistan working on rebuilding the governance and economic systems. And so understanding the people is important, but you don't just take random, 19, 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds, drop them in Afghanistan, and they don't magically know a lot about that country. And so what I did was build systems to help commanders have critical information about where's the local school, how many kids attend the school, how many goats are in the area. These questions you don't really think about, but are really important to be able to be a good commander of a military force operating in a civilian population, and really importantly built that system not just for me and the Marines that I was with, but also to kind of be a system that stood the test of time. And so the next commander that would come there next year would know about this stuff. Moved to Detroit in 2013, worked on a cool project to kind of help catalog all the blight in the city of Detroit. So, bankruptcy was happening. There was a lot of blighted buildings, some government, nonprofits, philanthropy, local businesses. Everybody wanted to get rid of this blight, but no one knew where it was or how much there was. And so I worked with some urban planners, some technologists to build an app to go out, take a photo of every single house and property in the city, and start collecting a database that let us actually know where the blight is, how much there was, and how much it was spreading. And the outcome of that is still live today, motorcitymapping.org, a platform that allows you to kind of literally draw a box and see a visual representation and actually see a photo of each of those different properties. And now we work at a cool company called Sift, helping organizations better understand the knowledge, skills, and experience of their people so they can leverage that to be more successful. And I don't list all these accolades just because I think I'm really cool. I just kind of, although I do think I'm pretty decently cool, I list this just to show that I've done a lot of different random things, from building technology in the deserts of Afghanistan to working on blight to enterprise software. I think there's techniques you're going to hear about. There are some common things you need to build stuff effectively, and I think the tools you're going to hear can be helpful in any circumstance. And I think the common thing about all of these projects, which there's not a lot, by the way, is that they all started out around really serious problems. I personally was not when I grow up, I want to start an employee directory company. That wasn't something I thought. It was a problem that I noticed as I was going through my career. Hey, it's really hard to get in touch with the right person. It's really hard to find the right person. It's really hard for me to remember who I was in a meeting with 2 weeks ago that had that skill set that I needed help with now. And so I think a lot of great products are built around solving problems that people have every day. And oftentimes the products are actually better defined by the job they're doing than the users they serve. And this is something that's somewhat controversial, especially if you're a designer or someone with a design background. There's a lot of user-centric design, which, by the way, I think is really important. But I think it's really good to illustrate this with a example. If you've been in startup land for a while, you hear a lot of people talking about who's your target user, what's your target persona. Also, by the way, very helpful things for a myriad of reasons. But some questions don't really get answered very well by asking about the target user. And so if I asked you, who is the target user of a Snickers bar? Kind of a challenging thing to ask, right? Okay, we could make a little, like a Starvin' Steve, write a little persona for this. Okay, so maybe the average user of a Snickers bar is 25 to 35 years old. Maybe they have a marketing degree. They love peanut butter and chocolate, they have dogs, they skinned their knee. I could come up with a whole bunch of criteria that might help you understand who the user of a Snickers bar is. But does this help you design a better Snickers bar? Does knowing that Steve has a marketing degree, do you now know that the Snickers logo needs to look really, really cool because people with marketing degrees won't know? It doesn't help you. Does it help you build a better chocolate bar? But what if we took a look at this from the perspective of okay, hey, what are some of the users that are buying a Snickers bar, buying it to do? What is the job that a Snickers bar is serving for the people who purchase it? And there's a lot of answers to this question, by the way. Most good products, or many good products, will have a lot of different jobs that they do well. But one of my favorite the only time I buy a Snickers bar is kind of the example I'll walk through here is, hey, I want to buy and eat something that will stave off hunger. So I need to quickly have a bite to eat, and I'm hungry, right? And it's interesting because on the surface, it doesn't sound very, kind of two different ways of looking at the world. I can look at the world from a persona perspective. I can look at the world from a job perspective. But like I said, if I'm a product developer and I'm trying to figure out how do I build the right thing, how do I modify my product to make it better or to better serve my users, I actually think oftentimes the job details are going to be much more helpful to help you understand this. This is especially important to kind of think from a competitive perspective. So if I'm trying to understand what I compete with, what Snickers bar competes with from Starving Steve, having these demographic details isn't going to really help me a lot, right? But if I have this job that I have, okay, hey, I want to buy something quickly that will stave off hunger, I can kind of start looking at what are the different things that other people might hire to do this job. So you could hire a Snickers bar to do this. What else could you hire? There's different ways to look at this. You could say, okay, who are the direct competitors? So what are the things that are similar to a Snickers bar that do the job in the same way as a Snickers bar? So a power bar, right? So this is like a perceived to be healthier solution to a Snickers bar. So maybe this is competing on the vector of health, or it's competing on some kind of vector of performance, right? But at the end of the day, these are both bars. They're roughly the same shape. They're, have a lot of the same ingredients, but they're very, they're doing the same job in the same way. Interestingly, though, a power bar probably isn't in the same section of a grocery store as a Snickers bar, right? The Snickers bar is probably near the checkout or on the candy aisle. Power bar is probably on like, a health food aisle, or maybe it's in like a GNC or some sort of like vitamin store, right? So just because your product does the job in the same way, it doesn't necessarily mean that the competitor is going to be in the same spot. There's some secondary competitors too, right? So let's say I'm at the airport, which is where I frequently am when I buy a Snickers bar, or I was prior to COVID, right? What other things can do this job of eating quickly and staving off hunger? Well, I might drink a protein shake, right? That's a quick way to eat food. I mean, I drink Soylent a lot too, or a lot of these meal replacement tools like Huel. That competes very with the Snickers bar. Or I could go get in line at McDonald's, right? I could grab a burger, right? Fast food is all about having quick food that staves off hunger. So these are things that if you're at the Snickers marketing team, you may not be thinking about like, man, how do we compete with a milkshake? But a lot of your competitors, the decision that people are kind of making in the moment at the airport, that actually is the competitive set, right? They're looking across at different things. And then sometimes there's like completely indirect competitors. They do a different job with a conflicting outcome, right? So maybe I think I want to have a quick bite to eat, but really I want to sit down and relax, right? So some percentage of people who walk through the airport, they're standing in line at the checkout at that, like, the airport convenience store, and they're going to say, hey, you know what? Screw this. I'm going to go have Applebee's instead. I say Applebee's is the only time I've ever eaten at an Applebee's in the last 10 years was when I was at an airport. So I mean, and this, again, I think is a very helpful framing that only jobs can provide to you, because persona is like a person can buy a power bar or eat at Applebee's or buy a Snickers, right? The understanding of the personal details of your user doesn't have nearly as much competitive force as an insight for you as understanding who you compete with. And that really is about the job. Who's hiring? Who are the competitors for this job that you may be hiring a product to do? Moving away from the Snickers analogy, because people are probably getting hungry, getting close to dinner, hearing me talk about all this food stuff. Here's some other jobs that we have, frequently come up in life and have existed, frankly, throughout history, but they have very different outcomes and will probably be very different in the future. Getting a package from A to B. If this was 1850 and we were doing some kind of like 1850s version of Zoom via telegraph or something, it would be very long. You'd probably hire the Pony Express to get something from point A to point B, right? You'd literally give a guy on a horse a package, and he would take it to another guy on a horse, and that would go all the way across the country. More commonly today, you have Brown, UPS delivering these trucks, especially now with COVID, they're all over the place, right? But if I were to ask you, like, in 50 years, will delivery look like this? In 100 years, will it look like this? In 1,000 years, will it look like this? Probably not, right? The job will still be there. You'll still need to get stuff from A to B, probably, unless we're all living in some sort of like collective consciousness in a computer. But the way you do it will be very different. And I would argue it could be very different even in 5 years, right? So Amazon and Google have all these drones that are delivering stuff now. And I don't know if that'll work or not, but it's pretty windy out today, so it'd be interesting to see a delivery drone. But like, I wouldn't bet against progress, right? And I would definitely not bet that we'll be doing this the same way in 2120 that we are in 2020, right? So these jobs exist for long periods of time, but the way you can address the job with technology can be very, very different. And I think this is really important because sometimes companies, they can get really in their heads, like Pony Express, their name was ponies, right? So when cars came around, it was a really hard mental change for the business to say, hey, like, we're not into the business of horses, we're in the business of delivering packages, right? Oftentimes companies define themselves by the industry they're in, not the job that they do. Another great example of this is energy companies, right? I would hazard a guess that in 500 years, we're probably not going to be using dinosaur sludge out of the ground to power our cars. But does BP view itself as an energy company or an oil company? We refer to them in popular media as oil companies. Well, if you're in the oil business, your company has at least, 100, 200 years that won't work. But if you're in the energy business, well, there's going to be energy forever. So you really have to make sure you're kind of defining yourself by the right questions. And so these very simple things, like what you call yourself or what industry you say you're in, they can have a really big impact on how you view your competitive set and how you view kind of the future and what you're building. So you want to meet with a colleague, right? Okay, pre-COVID again. I need to update this deck now that I look at it. Maybe you get on a plane, you cram yourself into a seat, and you're super uncomfortable, but it's coach, right? So because you're doing an internal meeting, and it's you just got a job at this company, so you're not going to spend a lot of money. So that's one way you can meet with a colleague. Or you could have luxurious, beautiful business class lounge at Delta where you've got before you even take off, you've got a cognac waiting for you, right? Very different experience of going to meet with a colleague. Or you could do what we're doing right now. You could meet with a colleague via Zoom, and it could take you 2 seconds, and you could have a conversation with them. All of these they can solve the same job in some ways, right? I can meet with a colleague, but I'm going to hire them for very different prices, and the experience that I have with these different jobs is going to be, with these different tools, is going to be very different. So again, you have to consider the full spectrum of ways that people are going to try to achieve the job that they need to get done. And it's important. I'm not saying airlines need to be concerned about Skype, but they need to acknowledge that, like, hey, yeah, I bet Skype has killed some percentage of business travel, and especially this COVID experience, some people, the business trips are not going to be like they used to be, right? It's going to be different. And so you should be thinking business development at Delta. That's something that you need to be aware of and think about how that impacts you, and vice versa. One of my perennial favorites is someone in software development: project updates. How do you communicate what's going on in your company? Well, you got Scrum boards, Jira, Trello, all those fun things. That's how you probably should communicate project updates, right? That's where the right answer is to put this information into a board, and so everybody can see it, so it's always up to date. But a lot of times, how does stuff actually get updated? An email to the team. Hey, this is what happened. This is especially true if you're not on the development team, right? Maybe the sales guy sends an email, because guess what? They're not in Jira, so the way they do this job is very different. Their information is conveyed typically through email, right? And so I think this is one of the reasons why product management tools are so challenging to get adoption on, because some people use the job of email to kind of circumvent the tool. And then lastly, meetings in some ways override these tools, right? So it's why you a good practice for stand-ups in the morning companies is they'll force the team to have the project management tool open, because if they don't have it open, they won't think about it and they won't remember to update it. So again, all of these tools are linked. Like Jira competes with email every single day, and they also compete with in-person meetings. So they either have to figure out ways to integrate into email, which Jira does, by the way. So you can CC a Jira ticket, and it'll automatically add that thread. That's them acknowledging that people are going to use a different tool and kind of figuring out a way to compete or work with it. And they also have presenting mode, right? They have modes like Kanban boards that are for meetings where people can kind of stand up. So companies like Jira are very well aware of what people are hiring to do these jobs of updating each other about projects, and they're smartly updating their product to kind of fit with that mindset. So why do people hire your product? This is a little exercise, a concept called jobs to be done. So jobs to be done is a formal framework that you can kind of look up. There's books written about it, kind of created by a guy called Clay Christensen at Harvard Business School. And actually it was originally created by some folks here in Detroit who kind of were consultants thinking about starting a new line of food, actually. It was an interesting story, which I won't bore you with. But essentially, what you want to be able to do with your product is answer this question. People hire your product to do the job of blank, every blank, when blank. The other applicants for this job are blank, blank, and blank, but your product will always do the job because of blank. Really interesting, right? So let's do this with a Snickers bar. People hire Snickers to satisfy their hunger every time they need a quick bite to eat at the airport. The other applicants for this job are McDonald's or a smoothie, but Snickers always wins because it's faster and less messy. So now this gets into the product development question and the marketing question, by the way, right? How can you make a Snickers bar better? If you're trying to make it better fit this job of people needing a quick bite to eat. One of the things I've seen recently the Snickers did, no joke, is they have this new king size Snickers where you can kind of twist it in the middle and it turns into 2 Snickers bars. And it gives you kind of a package to save for later that kind of automatically seals the other one off. Again, super smart. Maybe you don't want to eat the whole Snickers bar, and it allows you to kind of have it be very convenient, right? It's very focused on convenience. So maybe that's the vector that Snickers is really competing on with for this particular market. Is they're saying, hey, let's make it let's make the packaging easier and cleaner than eating a greasy hamburger or having like a big straw and milkshake that might melt. I also know that when Snickers, you may remember they had like an interesting ad campaign, like where they would start talking, like literally Snickers' whole ad campaign now is hungry Snickers, which is like the most Pavlovian response you can have. They're literally saying, hey, when you have this job, hunger, you hire a Snickers. Like that's the entire, it's 2 words, hungry, grab a Snickers, which I think is really powerful. And that's a marketing angle. But when they did that change I think it was about 6-7 years ago now, they also reformulated Snickers. Snickers, if you think about it, it doesn't feel like a luxury chocolate bar, right? When you bite into a Snickers, it feels substantial. It feels like you're biting into something. It balls up in your mouth. It's got a little bit of weight to it, right? That's all by design. Snickers, like versus like a Milky Way or like a Dove bar, it feels like a very different experience. I mean, these are both chocolate, right? I mean, I'm not a food scientist, right? But you formulate this thing very, very differently. And Snickers has gone out of their way to formulate the product to feel substantial, which is very interesting because many of the other candy bars on the aisle that you're going to see Snickers next to, they're focused more on a luxury, relaxing experience, right? Like a Milky Way, you kind of think of it like silky and soft and creamy. Snickers is going out of their way to not do that. They're actually kind of pushing against that. They don't want to be viewed as that. They want to view themselves as hungry, right? They have a whole ad campaign where they have like people who are cranky eating a Snickers bar, returning back to themselves. So this kind of idea of the job that Snickers does has pervaded their entire like kind of brand identity, literally to become their tagline, hungry, grab a Snickers, which is really powerful if you think about it, right? Like other candy bars are not nearly as well known for anything in particular because they don't have like a very strong job that you're hiring them to do. And so this is, again, where you can kind of use the job that your product does to rally your entire team or rally your entire company, not just the product team that you're working with, but really to kind of declare, here is who we are, here is what we do. Like everybody align yourself, from marketing to product to packaging to pricing, right? You can kind of really, really realign yourself, even if they still put you in a section of the supermarket where you may not kind of agree with your kind of categorization. One of my favorite aspects of Jobs to Be Done, other than just kind of helping you have an entirely new mindset on like what you are building, instead of being like, we're building a chocolate bar, we're saying we're helping people not be hungry anymore. It's a very different mindset. It is kind of thinking about the hiring process, right? So if you have a job, you need to hire something to do that job. And that means you have to fire something else, because most jobs, like I said, are kind of age old, right? Like you have a way of doing most jobs today. It's very rare. It does happen, but it's very rare that there's an entirely new job you need to do. Package delivery, great example. Julius Caesar back in like BC 10 probably needed to send packages, but the way he did it is definitely not a drone from Amazon, right? And I guarantee you Captain Picard needed to send stuff too, but he had a fancy transporter on the Starship Enterprise. So jobs are largely timeless, but the way you do them is very different. And what that means is at certain points in time, people have to kind of stop doing the old way of doing something. They must fire the current tool they're hiring to do the job, and they have to hire your solution. And so one of the helpful kind of frameworks of Jobs to Be Done is this kind of thing called the forces of change that helps you think about what are some of the different factors that someone will have to think through as they think about firing their current way of doing something, which is ingrained with habit, which is ingrained with confidence and trust of time, to go to a new way of doing some things. And in general, there's 4 things that need to happen to make someone switch. First, they need to have a problem with the current solution. There's some push that needs to happen. And unfortunately, if you're a startup, it's hard to kind of, oftentimes these pushes are very global, right? So we'll use airlines as an example randomly. Right now, a lot of people don't want to fly. You can still fly if there's a major emergency, but if you're just trying to talk to a customer or close a deal, unless you're selling rockets to NASA, you're probably going to do it via Zoom right now, right? And why is that? Because the current solution you would use, getting on a jet, there's some serious health implications with that. So oftentimes these pushes are very macro in nature. Maybe it's a retiring generation. Maybe it's new competitive pressures. Maybe it's, famine or war or some major natural disaster of some site that's kind of pushing the entire world, the entire market in a new direction. Then there's pulls, there's attractions too. So your product, you can do things like you can add new features, you can have a new whiz-bang integration, you can invent new intellectual property that no one's ever done before that can kind of pull people towards your new solution. So this could be maybe Skype announces a new set of security features that says, hey, or a better example is Skype says, hey, now you can do meetings for free, right? We have a free version of Skype that allows you to kind of like, you don't have to buy that airline ticket anymore. Oh, interesting. It's kind of pulling you towards a new solution. And if it was just as simple as saying, hey, there's macro problems in the world and you have some new features on your website, man, sales would be easy and getting a new product to market would be really, really simple. But the reality is, for every kind of push and pull that's kind of taking people towards a new solution, human beings are creatures of habit. We really don't like to do new things. And there's a lot of stuff that's going to kind of get in your way. So one of these is anxiety, fear of change, uncertainty. I don't know how to use Skype. Oh man, I don't know if my computer's up to date. Does it work on my Android phone? Does my client have Skype? Is the video quality going to be good? Is the sound going to be good? Are they going to be able to understand me? Can I share my presentation? All of these things come up whenever you have a new way of doing things, right? There's almost an unlimited number of anxieties. And I think one of the most important things as a product developer you need to understand is that paradoxically, every new feature you create can create anxiety. I mean, Zoom ran into this relatively recently. Hey, you've got all these new people joining the product. They started having a login with Facebook option because it's easy to log in with Facebook, and a lot of people have Facebook IDs and they don't have Skype, they don't have LinkedIn or Zoom accounts. I'm sorry. Oh, but guess what? When they allowed login with Facebook, all of a sudden now they're getting security violations because they're getting all this data from Facebook that maybe they wanted, maybe they didn't. And so now they have this entire new anxiety around security that they kind of created for themselves. I think the important lesson here is that every feature you add to your product, yes, it creates a pull, but it also has the potential to create anxieties. And frankly, a lot of what you may need to do as a company is build features that address the anxieties directly, right? Maybe that's the bigger issue. Maybe you don't need new shiny stuff. Maybe you just need to shrink the size of that anxiety to get people kind of over the hump of purchasing your product. And then lastly, of course, there's habit, there's status quo. There's stuff that's already working. Like, I already know how to use my phone. I already know how to text someone. I don't want to download this new app. Like, we've lived for, the classic one you always hear is like, we've lived for, X number of years without this solution. Why do we really need it now? And those kind of habits and existing allegiances can be really powerful forces. There's kind of a famous phrase where like a new solution has to be 10 times better than the old one in order to get kind of people over the hump. And I think that's true, right? Like you really need to kind of make sure that you have a lot more attraction and push to get people to switch, right? Like it took COVID to get people to start using Zoom, really, when a lot of these conversations probably didn't require 2 or 3 days of travel and all the carbon emissions that go into the atmosphere that go along with business travel, right? But it took a literally global pandemic to get people to really switch their behavior. And all of these things are in balance, right? So they're all constantly changing. And as a good product person, you really need to understand all of these. You need to understand the global macro environment with the push. You need to understand the pull of the new solutions that you're going to be developing and why that pull is going to be super strong. You need to understand what fear and uncertainty you create when you launch a new product into market and why people are going to be nervous about it from a security perspective, or from an adoption perspective, or from a use case perspective. Is it actually going to do the job it says it's going to do? And then you need to really be understanding and conscious of how people are doing this job today. Because what you need to do is you need to make the top of this graph so overwhelming. Like, of course, I'm going to use this new solution. Even though I have these anxieties and I have like current habits, it's still going to be very obvious for me to make the switch. So I'll use an example for my company. So if you don't know, I work at a company called Sift. If you missed the very beginning, we are a company that helps large organizations better understand the knowledge, skills, and experience of their workforce. A less fancy way of saying that is we're a modern people directory or a modern employee directory to help you kind of have a little bit of a profile for every person in your organization. And let's kind of go through this. I'm going to do some pushes here. Hey, maybe you are like me and you don't have every single person in your company's contact information in your phone. Maybe like me, you're working from home for the first time, and if you're not VPN'd into the network or your internet is down for some reason, you don't have like the desk phone anymore to look people up. Maybe you're collaborating with people from across the country or across the world, and you need to kind of look up people across your organization to help you because the person who you need help from isn't sitting right next to you. There's a lot of different pushes that might push people to say, hey, Why do I care about being able to look people up in my organization? There can be some polls. So we tried to make Sift really easy to use. We made Sift have information that other solutions don't have. So it's not just phone numbers. It helps you understand someone's bio. It helps you understand where they worked before. It kind of gives you a little bit of an internal LinkedIn feel. It also is a mobile app because we know that oftentimes they need to do work and they're not at their desk. And so you need to be able to, you have a smartphone, you should be able to look up any person in your company. And oftentimes all you've got is email on your phone. And so it's a little bit cumbersome to look someone up. Push towards us, right? Or pull towards us. But the anxiety is what's going on. Man, enterprise solution, we typically sell to companies that are 500 person and bigger. Man, it's going to be hard to implement this thing. It's got to integrate with our security environment. Are people actually going to use it? How do we get the data up to date from our HR systems and our phone systems and our instant messaging systems? Will people actually use this thing? Are we just going to deploy a piece of last year we deployed a piece of technology that no one uses? If you're in enterprise sales, you've heard these type of things before. And so these are things that I need to be keeping in mind when I'm kind of building a product roadmap. Is it better for me to build a new feature, or should I just spend more time addressing security? Should I spend more time focusing on integrations to pull data in from existing solutions, so I can kind of reduce that anxiety and make the pull and the push seem bigger, right? To kind of reduce the overall overwhelmingness. And then lastly, we have Outlook. Outlook you can look someone up in. Do we really need another employee directory? We have an IT team. We can build our own, right? We built our own employee directory in SharePoint. It's been 25 years. Our business has been around for a long time without an employee directory. We don't need one. These are kind of like any of these things I could kind of focus on from a company perspective or product perspective and kind of spend time and effort on, right? And of course, I'm a startup, right? I have limited effort. I can't do everything. And so this is kind of a good graph to go through for yourself to kind of think about what's going on? Like what are the pushes that are kind of pushing globally for your product or company? What are the status quos? Why would people not switch? And it's good to enumerate these and kind of have them up on a wall somewhere or talk about them with your team somewhere as you're kind of thinking about your product roadmap, because like I said, it's really tempting to just build new features, right? It's tempting to just throw new spaghetti at the wall, but those new features are going to introduce, new anxieties, and they might make you compete with existing solutions inside of an organization that they are really not willing to change. And the same is true. I'm using a B2B example here, but this also works really well for B2C, which we'll talk about right here. So going back to Google+, for those of you who might have joined recently, I kind of started off this conversation by saying, hey, Google+, kind of a big failure in Google's product history. They tried to launch a social network. It didn't really work. Well, I would ask you, and I'm going to proverbially ask you because I can't actually open up the floodgates to this, but what job did Google Plus do better than Facebook? What was it supposed to do? As someone, by the way, I've got a Google phone, I've got a Google Watch, I'm a Google fanboy. I got Gmail. I've been using Google Voice for years. I like Google. I don't know what Google Plus was supposed to be different than. I don't know. It had kind of this circle concept that was supposed to kind of help make things a little bit easier to kind of share stuff with certain people, but not other people. But frankly, it was kind of convoluted and a little bit hard to understand. I don't know what job Google Plus did. And going back to that forces of change, I have a lot of anxiety too, right? Okay, cool. I already have a solution that kind of lets me talk to my friends called Facebook. I don't necessarily know that there's anything wrong with it. And Google Plus is making a statement saying hey, here's one vector of value that's really, really, really different. I think this is very different. And of course, I'm not saying this is the only reason Google Plus failed. This is just an interesting way to think about it. I think an interesting kind of comparison to this is Instagram, right? Which launched very similar time frame, grew incredibly rapidly, largely organically, and ended up getting bought by Facebook only 2 or 3 years after launching, and seeing millions of new users every single day for its first 18 months of existence. Kind of crazy. What job did it do really well? Let's kind of go through that force of change analysis here. Well, Instagram, it's a photo editing app. It said, hey, people now more than ever are sharing photos with their friends. And guess what? It's kind of hard again, this is got to take yourself back a decade now, in 2011, 2010, when Instagram launched, editing photos and sharing them with friends is hard. You could now for the first time, everyone was carrying around a phone. I don't know if you can see, I'm holding my phone. I don't know why I need to do that. Everybody's carrying a photo taking device around with them really for the first time, right? It wasn't really until 2005 that every human, middle-class person in the United States had a smartphone in their pocket. Really, it wasn't until 2010, 2011. And so for the first time, we had tens of millions of photographers But man, editing photos is still kind of a chore, right? The photos looked bad, especially back then. The cameras weren't very good quality. If you wanted to edit them, you had to kind of like upload them to your computer and then upload them to Facebook. And it was kind of a process. You couldn't do it really easily. And so that was a challenge, right? You wanted to do this thing, but you couldn't do it. What did Instagram give you? It gave you one-click filters. You had a camera built directly into the app. You open up Instagram, you take a picture, and instantly you can apply a filter to it. Very quick, right? You look like an amazing photographer. Oh my gosh, now I can't think of a famous photographer. I'm Ansel Adams, right? Wow, look how good I am at photos. And then I can share it with one click as well. So it made it very, very easy instead of having to like email it to myself or plug my iPhone 3G into my computer and upload it to iTunes and then open up Photoshop. Like this is very, very quick, very, very simple. And they took the anxieties on too. Okay, cool. One of the big challenges of social media platform. Well, if you remember back in the day, Instagram imported directly your friends from Facebook. Facebook used to let you do that pre-Cambridge Analytica. They're a little bit more stingy about it now for good reason. So yes, my friends will be on the platform and they'll be able to see my photos. And the status quo, yeah, Facebook already had photos and sharing, but it was kind of bad. Like that wasn't the best part of Facebook, right? So Instagram smartly decided like, hey, we're going to kind of choose a vector of competition on Facebook where we can win. We can't beat Facebook at everything, but we can be better at posting photos on mobile than Facebook. And so that's what they did, and they crushed it. And Facebook saw that and we're like, well, that's going to be a really big business, and bought them for $1 billion. So again, this is just one example. It's not perfect. I literally just did this earlier today. So again, there's a lot of holes you can poke in it. Happy to talk through it more. The point here is that this analysis is really helpful for anything you're doing, to really understand why might someone switch from whatever the way they're doing something is today to your product and solution, and it gives you a little bit more of a holistic view of why that is. And it can kind of help you focus where you're going to be able to spend your limited dev resources or limited product building resources on vectors of value that are really going to drive differences for your users. Okay, I'm a little bit ahead of time, which I'm kind of shocked by, but okay, so here's just some like high-level points if you're just walking in at the very end of this talk. One, people hire your product to do jobs for them. So it's really helpful to understand the job people are hiring you to do, in addition to understanding them as users. I'm not saying don't do user persona stories. They're helpful, but like don't only do them. Understand the job you're doing as well. Your competitors may not be as direct as you think. So you kind of need to think about what other things compete for that job. And potentially most importantly is people need to have a reason to fire their current way of doing something to hire your new product or service to do it for them better. And so you really need to think about that process of what does someone go through when they're thinking about hiring or firing a solution. And that needs to be kind of forefront in your mind as you're kind of developing your product roadmap. Because if you don't, at best, you're just kind of guessing at what will work. And by the way, that works sometimes. Some companies do successfully just guess and get it right. I think actually many companies kind of guess and get it right. But if you want to be able to repeatedly innovate, you really need to understand the jobs that you're doing for your users and why they should hire your product versus any other way they could do that job in the universe. So, wow, look at that. 4:39, perfect timing for my 40-minute talk. I'm going to stop sharing now. I can pull this back up if there is a question. And I think there are
awesome, Sean.
So great. I'm now going to let the great
thanks so much, man.
Host, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
No, you're good. It was nicely tactful to understand how you think about something that people might be going through, not only with like themselves and their startup, but maybe even like their company, and how they might be interacting with clients in a way where they're getting pushback. You did a really nice job of making it tactful in how to think about that pushback. Like, it's fine, but here's how to maybe take it and deal with it. It was a nice tactful perspective, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Cool.
Thanks so much for the time. We do have a couple questions. And before we get to the first one, those of you attendees, if you're over here on the chat trying to add in, make sure you, right above where you're typing in, there's a field. Open that up and just make sure that you have selected all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see what it is you're typing. And then we can field your questions that way. So the first question, Sean, is from Michael. What's your perspective on the product design method of iteration? So Michael's asking just about iteration as its own method.
Yeah, I don't think I think iteration is great. I think it works better for some products. Like it's hard to iterate on a car, right? So like if you're Tesla, you can't be like, let's try build, it takes many decades potentially to build, a version of a car. But if you're in software, it's really helpful. And I don't think it's at all, I think that jobs to be done can be very helpful because essentially what you do is you take those hypotheses you've developed from your kind of forces of change analysis and you say, hey, we think that this is a really big anxiety that people have. Let's see what we can do in the next month or next 2 months or next week or whatever sprint to address this anxiety. And that kind of gives you some natural experiments. And you didn't invest too much. You said, okay, hey, we tested it. It may work, it may not. Maybe this isn't even a problem. Maybe we just perceive it to be a problem. But I think it gives you a really nice framework to answer the question, why should we do this and not that? So I think one of the challenges when you're building a product is there's so many options, right? Like the world is literally endless. You could do anything. You could pivot. You could double down. You could niche in. You could expand out. And so the jobs to be done framework kind of gives you some mentality and some tools to use when you're talking both to your team and to your customers about, hey, we think you have this problem. Here's how we think we're going to help you address it. And you can ideally bite off small sized pieces to chew on that instead of trying to, design an entire car all at once. But sometimes you do have to design the entire car at once, by the way. We run into this a lot. We're enterprise software. So like, sometimes we just have to say, hey, we're going to spend an entire quarter building an API. And you can't really make that any smaller than that. It kind of gets back into the whole minimum viable product, like build the smallest thing that helps address the problem in a meaningful way.
We have another question from Sentil. They're asking, does jobs to be done, this kind of jobs to be done framework, how does that work for B2B scenarios?
Yeah, I think it actually works, I would argue, even better for B2B scenarios because businesses typically, by the way, Sift is a B2B company, so got a lot of experience with this. The nice thing is businesses almost always think in terms of jobs, right? They're thinking like, I have a problem, I want to spend money to solve that problem. The problems typically have a size where they have like a budget they're thinking about. Like, is this a $100,000 problem? Is this a $10,000 problem? Is this a $10 problem? And the nice thing about businesses is like in the personal world, people can get very touchy-feely, right? When you're buying a car, there's all these like emotional decisions that kind of get wrapped up in it. I'm a huge car guy, right? So it's like, maybe the Mazda CX-5 is perfect for my family, but I like the way the Jeep looks, and the Jeep makes me seem rugged. And it's like, oh my gosh, like that's like, what a challenge. Like, how do you compete on that vector? Like that's a brand, that's like an emotion, that's like a marketing angle I don't even understand. But in business, like a lot of times it doesn't matter. It's like, I am a small business. I'm trying to buy a CRM. I want a business that I need something that integrates with QuickBooks. Cool. Like that's very easy. That's the job. It needs to do this. So I think you can kind of, it's actually, I would say, easier to do jobs to be done for B2B scenarios. And you can just frame it in terms of like, what is the problem that you are seeking to solve, business? And then how do you solve that problem today? I think the challenge with jobs to be done can be sometimes businesses solve these problems today. And this is where you can kind of have an ROI factor, is you can kind of say, hey, when you're doing this job today, it costs you X much. When you hire our solution, it'll only cost you, 1/10 of that or whatever. So you can like literally put a price tag on it for that forces of change diagram. It can be very helpful to kind of get them to understand like, oh, yeah, the way I do this today is really expensive if price is your vector, which isn't always, but if you're a cost saving tool, the jobs to be done framework can be really helpful to kind of help you understand what is the cost it takes for a business to do this job today? And then are we cheaper? And maybe you're not, maybe you're just better, which is fine. I don't think, by the way, cost is the only vector you should compete on. Actually, I personally think cost is the worst vector to compete on, but that's a whole other talk. So,
Sean, can you continue on this jobs to be done line and kind of go into taking it into a particular person within an organization? So if you were to think this is the CEO or CFO, or it's a salesperson or a product person, right?
Yeah, that's great.
What does it look like? Yeah.
That's a great point. Yeah. So I think the interesting thing about companies is sometimes the job is distributed across many different people. So let's take a pretty simple one, like a sales tool, like a CRM, customer relationship management tool. It's a tool that tracks where things are in your pipeline. Different people care about different jobs. So a salesperson, the job they care about is it easy to use? Can I use this on the go? If I'm at a sales meeting at dinner, can I plug into my phone? Is it low friction, right? They care a lot about the ease of use. The VP of sales, they care a lot about reporting. They want dashboards that show them really accurate information. So they want to be able to filter, they want to be able to customize, they want to be able to do all this. The IT person, the job they care about is how easy is this thing to deploy? Is this on the line? Is this cloud-based? Is it on-prem? Does it integrate with my email system, right? So the CEO, they probably care about, okay, is this going to help me achieve my goals? Is this going to help me close more deals? How much is this going to cost? Maybe that's a CFO. So you can kind of it's almost nice because they kind of do it for you. Like you kind of learn what their job is specifically. Okay, what is your role? And again, you wouldn't want to sell, by the way, you wouldn't want to sell the salesperson on the integrations because they might not care that it integrates with email all that much, right? They care about the ease of use. And so you really need to understand, kind of take that forces of change diagram I showed and kind of do another version of that per persona or color code it, where it's like, okay, the salesperson's concerns are red and the finance team's concerns are blue and the IT concerns are green, and list them out in that manner. And I think it can be very helpful. Again, one of the reasons why B2B is really nice. And what you never want to do is you never want to try to sell one job to someone who doesn't care about it, right? Because you don't want to go to you wouldn't go to a salesperson and be like, hey, salesperson, I have the easiest to implement CRM in the world. Yeah, okay, but it's ugly as hell and doesn't have a mobile app, right? Okay, like I just sold you on the wrong value proposition, right? That might have worked really well on an IT person because they know how much of a pain in the butt they can be to deploy, but you got to kind of align the job with the value, if that makes sense.
I like that idea of taking that and doing it multiple times over and over for, again, like those personas you were saying, where it's not a yes or no, it's a different thing. So
Yep.
Address it accordingly. Estella is asking, Sean, what recommendations do you have to uncover non-functional jobs?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. So I didn't get to talk about everything about the jobs to be done framework in this talk, but there's a process called the switch interview that you can do. You can Google jobs to be done interview. There's very famous YouTube examples of this where you can sit down, and it's a very contextual inquiry. Typically you have two people and you're going to sit down with a customer who recently purchased and switched from a competitor to your solution. And you're going to walk them through you kind of start like way back, like when was the first time you even thought about this, right? And it's very interesting. I went to a jobs to be done seminar, and like someone did this to me about like, what was it? It was like a closet in like a storage solution from IKEA. And they're like, when was the first time you thought about this? And I'm like, well, actually it really had to do with like my daughter being born, and like it became like almost like it was very emotional, weirdly, because like the real reason I bought this new storage closet thing was because I had a kid for the first time, and like I went to Pottery Barn because like I wanted it to be safe and I wanted it to be organic and I wanted it to have all these other qualities that so anyway, that's kind of like the answer is look up jobs to be done interviews online, and they go through kind of all the different phases of first thinking about the problem, and then researching the solutions, and then actively buying versus passively buying, and then actually kind of considering and doing the comparisons. And there's a wealth of resources behind it, and it fits really well into this jobs to be done framework. I did a terrible job of describing it, but if you Google it, trust me, you'll be entertained.
That's fantastic.
And Ilya's commenting here. I think he's exactly right. So Ilya's another fellow jobs to be done practitioner I know well. Yeah, I think especially in the B2C world, those emotional jobs I just talked about, they are very important. Like oftentimes people don't start the process of switching because they have a problem, because typically they have a way of doing it, right? Like we've gotten this far, we're humans, we've managed to go to space and go to the moon, right? Like most jobs have been solved in some way. It's not until you have a reason to really think about the change and a reason to switch that you switch. And oftentimes as humans, the reasons we switch are non-rational, they're emotional, right? So again, like this is why Target starts sending you a whole bunch of ads for furniture and cloth and stuff like that when you have a kid, because they know that's an emotional time in your life where you're having a lot of changes and you're thinking very differently about your life than you were before. So yes, I think it's a great point that I think in business it's a little bit easier because business can sometimes be more rational, where it's just like we want to save money, we want to deploy to a new market. But if you're doing B2C, or even business is emotional too. I mean, don't forget, I mean, maybe someone wants to get a promotion. That VP of sales really wants to make their sales team successful this year. That's an emotional, I mean, yeah, obviously they want money, but it's an emotional factor that really drives them. So great point, Ilya.
It's a good integration to include a business in the community, because a business is made up of people. Communities are made up of people. So if the business is shifting, there's got to be some shift that's happening in the culture of that people, and same with the community. If there's a college town, the local Target's going to all of a sudden, when everyone comes back, put out refrigerators and TVs. Right? That's a response to the people and their emotional state when they're coming into that store. They need that stuff. So this jobs to be done framework, you mentioned contextual inquiry, which is a design process, a design method. Do you want to give some people who might not be like Ilya and have some context there on what you mean by a contextual inquiry?
Yeah, so it really is, I think what you'll find, and thank you, Ilya, for this comment, 'cause it's well timed. You do have to start much earlier than you think, right? I'll go back to the Snickers bar example, right? Like, I don't make a decision to purchase a Snickers bar when I'm standing, and I make a decision to purchase a Snickers bar when I'm standing in line at the airport. But my mind has already been seeded, many years before about why I will choose that Snickers bar versus any competitor in the market. And this is more product marketing and marketing and branding than it is product management per se, but I mean, they're all related. And so you really have to go back and be like, okay, what, and I think, by the way, Snickers does an amazing job of this, right? Like Snickers, like they've created, I use the word Pavlov not lightly, like they literally have created a response where if I just go into a room of people and I say, hungry, like people will probably say, grab a Snickers, right? Like they have just seeded the market with such a core emotion, right? Like hunger is like a universal human thing that every single human has every day. And they've managed to build a brand around it, like a 3-word brand, right? And so I think that's really important. And so what you want to do with that is kind of go back and understand. And what you want to do is you want to go back and find, it's really helpful if you already have customers that have done this and have gone through this journey, because you will find it is almost never what you thought it was. Like the first time they heard of you, it will not be because of like, oh, I posted this piece of content that was really super relevant. It'll be like, no, like Ilya said, it's like, oh, our boss had a car accident and we couldn't get in touch with him. And that's why we needed to get an employee directory. And you're like, what? Like, what? Like, how is that the reason? It's like, yeah, well, he was out of the office. We realized we couldn't get in touch with him. His administrative assistant was out of the office. No one knew his cell phone number. We couldn't text him. And it just made us realize that, like, we just don't know people. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, that is not something you can, like, build a billboard for. Like, boss had a car accident, get Sift, right? Like, and you would never do that even if you could. But it's really helpful to understand. And I think the interesting thing about these inquiries is, like, you typically do a small number of them. So you do like 5, maybe 10. You don't do a lot. You don't need to do hundreds of them. And they're going to take some time. They're going to be, 20, 30, 45-minute conversations you're having with someone. But what you're going to find is you're going to start, I guarantee if you do 3 of these, you start talking about, okay, hey, when was the first time you ever thought about switching from product A to product B? Or when was the first time you even considered this as a problem, this job that you're going to work on? You're going to start seeing some like interesting resonances. And it might not always be boss gets in a car accident, but it might be, unexpected emergency, or really crazy kind of off the wall thing that happens that requires us to go outside of our normal chain. I'm using my examples for my company. It's stuff that requires us to go outside of our standard operating procedures. And so it's like, oh, okay. So interestingly, when things are working fine and the standard operating procedures are working, no one thinks about the employee directory. But the second there's an emergency and no one knows who to go to, all of a sudden having a mobile employee directory becomes really important because you don't know where you need to go, and you need to have a more structure. You need to have a more dynamic search. And so that's the type of thing that this type of focused interview will lead you on. And you have to be very open-ended because you have to, it's very hard to do if you're a product person. I actually think product people really should like take a back seat in this whole thing and bring in someone who's like a little bit more emotional intelligence, because product people want to go in and be like, so obviously you were comparing the employee directory in Outlook to the employee directory in Skype, and you realize there was a problem. And it's like, no, like no one has ever thought about the employee directory in Outlook in the history of their life. Like it's just something that happens to exist that they use. And so you really have to kind of take a meandering path to get there. But it is, and this is again, like sometimes that you have to take, a curved road is the fastest one. That's not really a saying, but it's definitely true. You want to kind of start very far back and understand what were all the steps in the process that got you to start thinking about this solution, because that will also help you make sure your product is really solving the problem. And really from a content and a product marketing perspective, you can start marketing very early, because especially today, people make decisions, like they're not going to call up a salesperson and be like, tell me about, like they've already, by the time they start shopping, they've already kind of made their decision in some ways. So you really have to kind of start very early in the process to get their attention and get their awareness, so that when they start seeking a solution, you're already on the top of their mind.
Curved road is the fastest path. You heard it here first, folks. I'm going to start quoting you on that because it's so true. You get forward and then because you think you have it, and you start to curve anyway because you realize, oh, X, Y, and Z weren't right. We have to pivot and then come back. So if you're not starting there, then You will eventually.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
Well, thanks so much, Sean, for today's session. Again, anyone watching, hashtag DETSW2020. If you're watching this on Hey Summit after the fact, you can follow along with the chatter and anyone else who's been following along with the panel discussions and sessions at that hashtag DETSW2020. Thanks so much for all your expertise and insight, Sean.
Yeah, thanks for listening to me ramble for an hour. Hopefully it was helpful to people. Yeah, jobs to be done. Google it. There's a lot of great resources out there. I think I would highly recommend, I don't make any money from this. I don't have an Amazon referral link, but Competing Against Luck by Clay Christensen. He kind of created this along with, like I said, Bob Modesta and some other people here in the Detroit area, actually. But this is a great kind of compendium if you want a single place to go to kind of learn about this theory. Great book to read. Actually interesting. I know a lot of business books can kind of feel like eating cardboard, but I really enjoyed it. So would highly recommend, if you have questions about this or you think it's stupid, read that before you judge it based purely on my presentation. So thanks, everybody.